Well, Paris, first of all, congratulations on Raging Grace. How does it feel to have this out in the world about for everyone to finally see after the festival run and everything?
Oh my God, thank you so much. I am very excited and also super nervous having a film like this out there. But more than anything, I'm just so relieved that it's out there at all.
That relief must feel like absolutely incredible. But I what my favorite thing about Raging Grace is how you use gothic horror aesthetics in a film like this. And I say that because gothic horror has been such a white genre, and I feel like we're finally starting to break out of that. And I love how you use these gothic horror tropes to tell the story of this mother and her daughter. So I wanted to hear more about just using gothic horror to tell a story like this that's not centered on white people and things like that. I was just really curious about
Mm,
that.
Sure. Um, well, the Gothic house for me is something I have seen all throughout my childhood.
Mm.
Watching movies like, Rebecca and things like The Changeling or the others. And for me, it represents so much. One, it's a place that, historically, someone like myself or my mother would never have set foot in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in modern times, unless you're a cleaner, then yes, by all means.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the Gothic house, for me, not only did it just feel like a something familiar, um, for any sort of audience movie, for a film that tackles really complex issues, it represents, British colonialism to me. It represents new and
Mm-hmm.
old white power. It represents the master's house, a la Audre Lorde. And it felt like something that was the perfect visual symbol to confront. Um, so yes, like and I always had this vision of burning the house down, metaphorically and literally. Um, and who doesn't want to burn a big house down? Uh, exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing. And how did you find that location? What was that location scouting like to find your big gothic house?
Do you know what they are? They're a dime a dozen here in the UK.
That's
Um,
true. I always forget how many massive houses and like estates there are in the UK.
I know that's the thing. We have a history of aristocracy and landed gentry, and the thing is, there were so many of those houses back in the day that come out modern times. People didn't quite realize just how much money it took um, to you know keep these structures
Yeah.
in place and working. It usually required a huge team to do that. So a lot of them turned into wedding venues, and it was easy for us to sort of like check these places out. But
Mm.
for so many of the ones that we really liked, they were booked for weddings. Everyone just felt like they needed to get hitched at that period of time when we wanted to film. So frustrating, but it did lead us to this house that I'm not going to give the name of because the people that own it are legit criminals. This is what we found out later, by the way. But what I will say is that we found out once we were in that this was at the time our prime minister was Boris Johnson, and this is one of his holiday homes. And so it brought about it had layers, man.
That's wild. And filming this movie where in Boris Johnson, one of his summer homes. Oh my God.
Yes, totally. Do you know what? There's a scene in the film where I got Grace to dance on top of a table during one of the night scenes.
Yeah.
That is a table that him and his ministers would have their meetings on. And there's a chair there made out of bearskin that only he's allowed to sit on. Um, and so there are just yeah, many things in that place and that house that worked so well for the film, but you know, um when we were there, it just had this really foreboding, horrid energy. And we this film was in reaction to that specific government who was so, you know, they were very, very cruel to immigrants at the time, still today. And
I was
so
gonna say, sadly, I don't think it's gotten much better.
I know, but it well, strangely it helped us, you know, uh, hold that anger in place, but it
Yeah.
expressed in an artistic and creative way.
Well, that actually leads to my next question because I would love to know more. I started talking about the Gothic, but like where this idea came from. And you talked about colonialism and you said the British government and how they treat immigrants. I'd love to hear more, just diving more into like why this movie, because it is such an important movie, especially in the horror genre and hearing
Mm.
the story. So where did it come from for you?
Oh my gosh, this is yeah. Um, I needed to write this film because I was in a really really dangerous place,
Okay.
with how much rage I was feeling, an incandescent kind of rage, you know, towards a government who were really stoking uh, open aggression towards Southeast Asian um, people, you know, and but because of the pandemic, they also vilified immigrants who, like my mother, was came out of retirement to, you know, help during the pandemic. The, you know, the kind of immigrants who were nurses and doctors who were supporting a very underfunded, under-resourced national health system and dying on the front lines, the majority of which were Filipino. Um, this this film is, to me, my own coming of age. It
Wow.
is something that finally gave me the permission to express an anger and a frustration that I had never given myself, um, you know, the permission to express. And that often was because, you know, my parents who, um, you know, historically had received all of these racist micro and macro aggressions did not want their kids to go through that. And so many of the lessons that they taught us came from a place of survival. But I think what they didn't realize was that they were teaching us to assimilate, you know, teaching us to be
Yeah.
quiet, and to be the good immigrant, you know, get the good grades, excel, but don't stick out. Don't ruffle the feathers, just be grateful for who you are and where you are. But what that ultimately does and what that did to me was suppress an important part of who I am, almost my whole being, my heritage, my culture, my mother tongue,
Yeah.
just so that I'm, you know, I could socially contort myself to fit into this cookie cutter mold of what it is to be a good one. And so this film is an open rebellion to that, you know, told through a lens of horror. Um, it is an open challenge to colonialism and new and old white power. But as much as it is about that rage, it is also about finding space for joy and celebration. Um, you know, giving ourselves permission to feel a belonging in ourselves and wherever we decide to call home. That's what it is to rage gracefully.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that this film is so important for so many reasons, and I know how difficult it is to talk about that. So I appreciate you being so candid and open with your responses, because we need this. Like, this is a genre that needs these kinds of stories. And this is a story that everyone needs to see. It's not just about the horror genre, obviously, but my little niche in the world. We don't get a lot of stories that are this openly like anti-colonialism in the mainstream. And so it's just incredibly refreshing, and I'm so glad that this story can get out to hopefully a wider audience, to be like, hey y'all, like, pay attention, because
Yeah.
yeah, so I appreciate
No, but
putting
I mean, I
yourself out there like that. I know it's like, I know that's a lot of emotional labor for you, and it's got to be so difficult to be facing that constantly, and especially in the house where Boris Johnson and his ministers are like, just hanging out and filming there. It's got to be so difficult for you as a director who has this life experience. And there's I I'm curious if there's catharsis there, if there was catharsis there for you, and or if you needed that catharsis. Was that something you needed, or was that something you were seeking, or did you not? You were just wanting to make sure people could see a story like this.
mm, um I think the catharsis came in the the initial script, which was
Okay.
a very messy expression of
Yeah.
a feeling that I was allowing myself to just throw out there.
Yeah.
I suppose the catharsis never truly came when it came to
Yeah.
making this,
Okay.
just because of what it was always challenging me to do,
Yeah.
which was to chip away at an old self, to try and make something as authentic and as true as possible. And it was a really painful process. I have to
Yeah.
say, um, and you know, you when you write something like this, you have to embody characters who have been the source of a lot of discomfort and a lot of pain. You have to say the words, that you've received. You embody an amalgam of people who um, have very specifically made my mum and dad's life very difficult. Um, it has broadened my understanding of hurt people. Even for, say, someone like Catherine, who is
Mm-hmm.
as vile as she is still a victim of the patriarchy. you know as disgusting as Mr. Garrett is still someone who was deeply unloved, and a lot of that void manifested into an obsession. um, but the catharsis has to be for the people that watch this. I feel,
Okay.
for audiences
Yeah.
that may never have had a cathartic spectacle, in, say, the films like Get Out, which was incredible for people, not just for the Black community, but for people beyond that. And I really wanted to uh, gift something that brought nuance to anger and rage,
Yeah.
and to give ourselves hope,
Yeah.
and not just trauma,
Yeah.
not just hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then my last question for you is, I'm curious why you chose the horror genre to tell this story, and using the horror genre as the lens to tell this story. Are you a horror fan? Like, what about the genre kind of called to you for telling Raging Grace?
Mhm. I never set out to make a horror film per se. I'm a
Okay.
big fan of horror. I grew up watching far too much horror when I absolutely should not have. Um, uh, but the more I began to sort of allow myself to feel the year, to feel the experiences of myself and my mum, and what it is
Mhm.
to, say, be a domestic worker or
Yeah.
even an immigrant, so many of those experiences, unfortunately, are horrific. Um,
Yeah.
and it was a very natural direction, to tell that story through the lens of horror. That being said, it needed to be, it couldn't be constrained just by that genre. It is a thriller, it's a drama, it's
Yeah.
also a comedy in some areas, which to me, as a whole, is very reflective of life. However fantastical it may seem, um, there's uh, a truth there, or an uh, authentic um, approach in telling a
Yeah.
story like this. So
Yeah.
horror, I'm so grateful to genre because it gives us tools as filmmakers to, you know, um, often bring nuance, or a microphone to very nuanced situations,
Yeah.
and challenge them in ways that traditional cinema, whatever the fuck that means, may not allow you to. You know.
Yeah. Well, Paris, thank you so much for your time and your answers and just sharing not just this movie, but yourself with me and with everybody. I know, how difficult that can be, and I really appreciate it. And I'm so excited for everyone to see Raging Grace and experience the story.
Well, no, thank you so much for watching it, enjoying it, and coming up with really thoughtful questions. And yes, please tell your friends, tell your uncles and your aunts to watch this film. We
Please.
need as much support as we can get, but thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.